The things that are being talked about now in the elections are things that the gurus and the PR and the kids are telling them to say, but they're not necessarily the things that are uppermost in people's minds. Fundamentally, I don't think the public is actually asking for tax cuts. They're just saying, I can't get a GP. There's waiting list at the hospital. This doesn't work. There's potholes everywhere. It's just the whole the shit in the river. Talk about capital gains. I just get the shit out the river. The level of poverty, the level of child poverty, the level of the fact that almost a third of the country is dependent or has a connection with the food bank. These are just massive things, but aren't being talked about. So I think people feel frustrated about all this, and then watch these kind of debating games about £2,000 tax thing over 4 years, and it wasn't the Treasury. But if I just keep saying it often enough, people will go, oh, well, he said it 5 times now, so it must be true.
Armando Iannucci, hello, how are you?
Hello.
You good?
I'm very good, yes.
Welcome to PoliticsJOE.
Yeah.
On the off chance that any of our audience aren't familiar with you or your work, how would you introduce yourself? How would you describe yourself?
Oh, okay. I'm not already. I'm going through some existential.
Yes.
How do I?
I like to send you off kilter with the beginning.
I like to make funny things, and I like to make people. If people think about things as well as laughing, then that's good. So I go from the silly to the wry, from Thick of It to Alan Partridge to Death of Stalin to David Copperfield, and everything in between. And I've been doing that for, I think, about 30 odd years now.
Wow. What a career.
Yeah.
Incredible. I mean, obviously, with British politics at the moment, it's just like the thick of it, isn't it?
Well, I see
just
that.
Like
it's just like somebody in politics said to me that the only thing about the thick of it that isn't accurate is that it doesn't have people in it saying this is just like the thick of it. Because whenever anything goes wrong in someone's campaign or whatever, that's what they say. And people also say, why, are you tempted to do the thick of it now? And I say, no, because I kind of thought the thick of it was about a golden era when there were kind of rules. And most episodes of the thick of it are about, the minister thinks they might have done something wrong. And so how can we stop the world from finding out, and how can we repair the damage, only it gets worse? But now, no one's bothered if they've done something wrong. That's seen as kudos, really.
Indeed. I guess it also provokes the question, doesn't it, about whether politics is downstream of culture, if culture is downstream of politics, right? Because you sort of, first episode airs what must be about 20 years ago now.
Yes.
Thick of the thick of the New Labour years,
yes.
The Alistair Campbell influence, etc. And whether or not to understand it as kind of a reaction to the politics of the moment, or to understand politics right now as a reaction to it, I guess. I don't know what the answer to that question is. But.
Well, it's only in that, when crazy things happen now, like, Rishi Sunak announcing the election in a thunderstorm, when he has, a newly built £5 million announcing room in Downing Street.
Yep.
That's when you get, it's like the thick of it. Or photographs of him with like big Mickey Mouse ears behind him by accident, or exit and stuff. Those are all things from the thick of it. But the thick of it was based originally on my doing research into what actually goes on. So although quite a lot of what's in it should be a surprise to the viewers, it's not a surprise, or wasn't a surprise to people in politics at the time, because we were trying to just absorb into our storylines things that do happen. But we would make up the main story, but the details would be based on reality, and we just exaggerate reality to breaking point. It would go out, and then someone from Whitehall or whatever would ring the next day going, how did you find that out? Because we kept that really quiet. You think, well, that really happened. Genuinely happened. Because most of the meetings, and with each series, each series began with me going, I think we have to take it even further this time, because it's still nowhere near as crazy as what's... And then the very opening episode, I think it had them in the back of a car trying to improvise policies that cost no money. with 45 minutes to go before the press conference, because all their money had been junked by Malcolm Tucker. And I've had various people who have served in various cabinets come up afterwards and say, I've been in the back of that car. And that frightens me.
Yeah, it should do. I think it should frighten you.
You know, and, think of it was originally there as a sort of warning manual, not an instruction leaflet. You know, we shouldn't be trying to ape. People shouldn't be going into politics to try and be like Malcolm Tucker. They should be going into politics to prevent that sort of over control of the messaging happening.
What is it that you think is the kind of the driver behind the longevity of it? Is it that closeness to reality in the conception when you were doing your research and thinking it bears it, or is it just the sort of the arc that British politics has been on has meant that people have gone, oh my God, this was so prescient?
Well, as I said, I do my research. I take a lot of pride and care in my research because I do want to get it right. And I don't think, and part of the reason I did the thing of it, I was a huge fan of Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. Still very funny now, still great. But the sort of power dynamic that it illustrated was the minister's desperately trying to get something done, and it's the civil servant, the permanent secretary, who's stopping him because they're so used to the status quo. And I just felt that doesn't reflect the dynamic now, which the dynamic now is the central control of the leader's office or the prime minister's office and those around them, and the treasury and the funding element, and the ministers just being really spokespeople or, glorified puppets with very little power, and the control around them by the spin room and what were called the enforcers under Blair and Brown, who were these, sound like the Dementors, who just go out and tell different departments, this is the line, this is what you say, and that's how much money you've got. So I wanted to reflect that dynamic, plus the kind of coterie of unelected experts, special advisors, who advise the ministers on policy, who are all in their kind of mid-20s. And that was when I was investigating and researching Thick of It before the pilot. That was the thing that was completely new to me. I hadn't realised the extent to which our country is run by infants who have not been elected and who will relentlessly rise up the ranks with each failure that they are responsible for.
Relentlessly moving forward, falling.
So that was interesting. And I don't think that dynamic has changed. The parties have changed, the policies and the themes have changed, but I don't think that fundamental dynamic, we were seeing it now, I suppose it's enhanced in the campaigns, because that's when it's all about medium and message and policy and less about the day-to-day running of stuff. So that's when these tiny little girls and boys are at their most influential in telling Rishi Sunak to say this and telling Keir Starmer not to say that and so on. So that's when and it's in situations like this that then things can go wrong if they're being badly managed or haven't thought through the implications of where they're filming, like filming in front of the Titanic, in
Belfast,
in Belfast, and just being asked about the sinking ship and so on. So that kind of naivety comes through, and I think that's why people feel a lot frustrated by the way elections go on, because the things that are being talked about now in the elections are things that, the kind of the gurus and the PR and the kids are telling them to say, but they're not necessarily the things that are uppermost in people's minds. I think there's there's been this whole phantom fight about raising taxes and not raising taxes and all that, but fundamentally, I don't think the public is actually asking for tax cuts. They're just saying, I can't get a GP. There's waiting list at the hospital. This doesn't work. There's potholes everywhere. It's just the whole, there's shit in the river. It's just
it goes on and
just
on.
Don't talk about capital gains. Just get the shit out the river.
Yeah. First principles, please.
It's so basic. Plus, people can't eat. People can't afford. It's the level of poverty, the level of child poverty, the level of the fact that almost a third of the country is dependent or has a connection with the food bank. These are just massive things, but aren't being talked about. And also, I think a lot of people now are saying Brexit was shit, and some of us who said that at the time don't want to kind of talk about
vindicated, perhaps.
Well, it's horrible because actually, the results, which is, what did you expect if you kind of looked at your largest trading partner and went, no, I think we'll trade with New Zealand. Look at the map. It's that basic. But no, we want our blue passports. And, but I think a lot of people, and including, and this is the important bit, a lot of people who did vote for Brexit are now going, okay, I did it as a protest, or I was, convinced by the argument. It's gone wrong. What we're doing about it. But actually the whole subject has been sat on by all the parties, indeed by the media. There isn't a report on BBC News or ITV going, a lot of people are upset by Brexit, but it doesn't seem to be coming up in any of the manifestos. Why? It's so I think people feel frustrated about all this, and then watch these kind of debating games about £2,000 tax thing over 4 years, and it wasn't the Treasury, but if I just keep saying it often enough, people will go, oh, well, he said it 5 times now, so it must be true. It's and it does worry me. It's not just funny. If he wanted to do a funny, it worries me because there's a vacuum, and dangerous things happen when there's a vacuum. People move in to create to take that space.
That's a very true and prescient point. There's so much in that answer I want to unpack.
Okay, yes, I will happily attempt to unpack it.
So I think. Well, first of all, on the point about professionalisation, I think there's a tendency to understand New Labour as kind of the beginning point at which the political process becomes professionalised, and the grid, and take a line and stick to it, etc., etc. And I was reminded recently, there's a quote going around from Dominic Cummings in 2014 of all people, and he's kind of saying that when you come into government, you think that there's going to be some kind of door behind which there's a team of secret ninjas who are going to fix everything. And then you get there and realise that, in fact, there is no door. No. There are no ninjas. No. It's just you. And, some supremely confident and capable, our army commander is not going to sweep in and sort this out for you. It's not James Bond.
And that was part of the reason of doing something like The Thick of It Anyway, which was to tell people that, you get cowed by the impressive-looking buildings, like Bank of England and the Treasury, and you think the people behind them must know what they're doing. Then you realise, no, they're not idiots. They're just human, and they're just getting like most people. They're getting through the day thinking, "I think I did okay, but I don't know. Am I doing? And
might have ham and mustard for lunch."
And yes, and funnily enough, somebody told me when I was researching for Veep and In the Loop, which was the sort of take on Blair and Bush going to war, somebody said to me that Kissinger, when he was first in Nixon's, working for Nixon, I think as national security advisor at the start, for the first couple of months, he was going around going, am I doing all right? Does he think I'm doing? That's Henry Kissinger, who very soon had the confidence to, bomb Cambodia and think that was merited a Peace Prize. But the other thing you just said there about I was told the very same thing by a guy who used to work at the CIA, because I was looking at the failures in intelligence about Saddam Hussein and weapons of mass destruction and where all that came from. And he was ex-CIA, and he said, I worked at the CIA, and like Dominic Cummings, he worked there thinking that through that door was the big room with the screens and And one day someone will come and tap him on the shoulder and say, "Do you want to come and work there?" And he said, "It didn't happen." And like he said, they were getting better intelligence on Iraq from the local Baghdad newspapers than they were from their own. You know, you realise everyone is sort of making it up as they go along, and everyone is just coming up with an answer because there isn't time, you know, to spend on this topic.
It's a simultaneously incredibly freeing, but also terrifying realization.
It's terrifying because we just assume these people know what they're doing, and as I say, they're not incompetent. They're not, you know, mad or evil. The majority of them, they're just human, and they're fallible. And, you know, we don't let them make mistakes. You know, we're very much, because we have this now 24-hour pressure on them. We're all journalists now because with our phones. And, you know, if we catch anyone grumpy, then we film it and go, "He's grumpy, but he's in charge of health. Surely he should resign now," you know. And you see the context, and it's like 11:30 at night, and he's on a train trying to get to Sheffield, and he knows he's going to be late, and he's got an early start tomorrow, and fuck it, someone's pointing a phone at him now. Yeah. You know, it's all that.
Yeah.
But it is also the, you know, the kind of arrogant self-confidence of these 20-somethings who think, "I could come up with a health policy today.
Yes.
I'll tell the minister this."
Yes.
You know, and you can't. You've read a lot about health, but that's not the same as, you know, hearing from people who work in it and what the things are that need fixing.
Your point about this election and the £2,000 in tax, or, you know, national service, or, you know, take your pick.
Yeah.
I kind of think, you know, despite wanting an election to, you know, its sort of platonic form, ideal form.
Yeah.
That is what it is. It's, you know, meet me in the marketplace of ideas and let us discuss differing views on healthcare policy.
No, that's not going to happen. It's not the Agora in ancient Athens.
Yes,
where
indeed.
People were happily
debating.
No,
absolutely not.
No,
but on this occasion, it almost feels more base than that.
Yeah.
And that it is just almost about sadism and vengeance and going, we've had it with you.
Yeah.
You could promise me the moon, Rishi Sunak.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Oh, yeah.
You're gone.
Yeah.
It's about punishment more than anything else.
Yeah, it is. But it's also, I think, punishment at what we're getting still, which is silence as much as possible from Keir Starmer, because, you know, I don't want to, you know, we're in a good position. Just say nothing. Say, you know, give a few little, we're thinking about this. Say it's hard, but, you know, we'll get there. You know, do that. And from Rishi Sunak, just invent stuff. You know, invent policies that cost a lot of money, and invent the fact you'll be able to pay for them from, you know, savings. Yeah. On, you know, on the welfare system and tax evasion and all that, which you somehow haven't managed to find over the last 14 years. But now you know, say that, say the £2,000 thing, even though, you know,
discredited.
There was something Orwellian about the fact it was not, because the Treasury and whatever said, no, that's not true. But also, statistically, you're saying £2,000, but that's over 4 years. So it's really £500 per year. But you're trying to say, so there was something Orwellian in that he was being told, not only have you lied, but you've lied inaccurately, which is, so you just think, well, where is meaning anymore?
Yes, it's lost.
It's lost. So I think there is a swelling anger about that, and I think that is reflected. You know, I talked about a vacuum, and I think that's where Farage and Reform was. We'll take it. We'll swoop in there because a lot of people are genuinely angry and getting increasingly so, because this national conversation we're meant to be having right now isn't happening.
I think that's the danger for Starmer. I genuinely think
exactly
without verbalising you know, a great many ideas or a vision.
Yeah.
It's a catch-22, because if he then gets into power and does something extremely radical, people will go, well, you don't have a mandate to do this. You didn't tell us you were going to do this. Conversely, if he does just stick to kind of what he's doing, and he tinkers with the train set a little bit. Maybe puts a bush here rather than laying some new track and trying to sort out the mess. I think that apathy that has kind of evolved into hatred almost of the Conservative Party could very quickly turn on the Labour Party.
Well, because it will be an apathy and then turning into hatred towards the political, let's call them, I don't know, the usual suspects, the two big parties and so on.
The establishment.
And I think you can see Stammer's rationale, which is we're far ahead. I'm luring over the people that I need to lure. I'm luring back the people who voted Brexit but were previously Labour. I'm getting the kind of, more centrist Conservatives who are worried about where, the Conservative Party is going and are very much anti-reform and we're pro-EU. So I'm getting them. Why should I upset anyone by, But there is... it does worry me that there is a whole generation out there who are very, very politically motivated, but they're just not that into party politics. They're into issue politics. So they will be, campaigning for the environment or poverty, or they will take the, and they are the next generation. And if they're already saying, as some of them are, democracy just doesn't work. Should we try an alternative? As well as people who maybe weren't engaged in politics, who are now going, I can't make head or tail of either of them. There's nothing separates them. They're saying the same old stuff. I'll vote for that guy over there who at least, looks colourful and is a bit making more noise that I kind of get, in that, that reform have the luxury of being able to say whatever it is, come up with policies, whatever policies they like, because they're not going to be enacted. So they know all they have to say is anything that touches the kind of those, not just the dog whistle stuff, but things that could also appear quite reasonable, like we'll fund the NHS from top to bottom. Why? How are you going to do that? I don't know how they justify how they're going to do it, but their spending plans are even bigger than any of the other. But they're going to do it by. They're going to do it by not paying interest back on the loans for quantitative easing or something like that. Some system that suddenly can give you £40 billion if but they also have the luxury of not having their policies analysed.
No.
Because they've never had to before. So it will be interesting to see in the remaining 3.5 weeks, now that they are going to be at least the third party, if not the second party. I think the media have an obligation to test those ideas out and to question. I mean, Farage gets a bit narky when he's questioned, and that's a sign of someone who just likes the performance aspect of politics, but not the detail aspect. But actually, governing is about the detail.
I noticed, I thought I noticed a change in his demeanour over this election cycle, where he's much more combative and aggressive towards the media when they're questioning him. Before, I think the relationship was far more symbiotic, and he was.
He needed the media because the media gave him the platform. And so on.
Whereas now it's almost as if, because he's been spending so much time on the other side of the Atlantic, he's kind of learning that lesson of actually, if you kind of demonise these people, go to war with them, it undermines them when in the future that, let's say they do, okay, we've looked at reforms, health policies, and the idea that they're not going to charge any tax on private healthcare providers, they've costed it as X. There's no way it costs that little. It's going to be far more. He says, well, why would you trust them? Look how they speak to me. Look how.
And also, we've got our own media now. We'll take questions from GB News because they're a proper, objective,
serious
outfit. And but he's not doing that in isolation. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've had instances of people like Nick Robinson and reporters from the BBC being bowed at SNP press conferences for asking challenging questions about their plans, how things are going to be costed or how certain things are going to work. We've had it at certainly conservative events. And we're also seeing it at some Labour events as well, when any reporter is too forensic on an MP, you'll see the Twitter reaction is like another right winger from the BBC questioning, and it's not if you question somebody about something, that's not identifying yourself as from the opposite camp. It's just saying that your plans should be able to withstand inspection. They have to be, to use the phrase, fit for purpose. So our job is to stress test them, is to ask you the questions of like, have you thought this through? Where are you going to get the money? How does it work? Where do these people come in? What happens if this happens? And it's irritating and annoying and it's hard. And so what? Do you know what I mean? It has to be hard. It's
part of the job,
that's how you work out whether your arguments can stand up. But we've kind of got into this thing of you're either with us or against us, and if you're asking me a question about it, you must be against me. In which case, A, you're an idiot. B, I don't want to talk to you. And that way nothing gets done. And the idea of having a rational conversation between two people who disagree is looking more and more like some antique kind of from a bygone age.
Yeah.
And that's my worry.
You mentioned poverty in your last answer, and you are a patron of the campaign against child poverty. There's been a lot of discussion.
The Child Poverty Action Group, specifically.
Backwards and forwards about sort of two-child benefit cap, and Labour saying they're not going to commit. We're still waiting for the manifesto this week, so there is still a possibility that they might row back on that. And actually, I guess it connects to the previous point, right, about whether or not policy has enough of a prominence during this election campaign. I would probably say that something as important as child poverty hasn't had enough discussion just yet.
Exactly. Yeah.
What's your view, let's say particularly in that policy area, looking at the main parties and their policy offerings? I appreciate that the Conservative manifesto came out about an hour ago, so you probably haven't had the time to read the whole thing just yet.
No, but they're going to be funding tax cuts by saving $12 billion from welfare and benefit reform. And that kind of that concerns me a great deal, because it still feeds off this idea that somehow the benefit system is being used and abused by a great phalanx of people who are, lazy and scroungers and so on. And it's not. I mean, I don't think the public agree with that point of view now, because I think everybody, if not themselves, knows someone either within their family or within their kind of friendship who are in real difficulty and who are working but are on low pay and use a food bank. And we're ashamed to use a food bank, but now it's become the norm. And, and not just food banks, but, baby banks and all the other charity outlets that are there to kind of provide a more secure base of support, because the welfare system isn't working. But what's increasingly worrying is that they want to reform the welfare system so that they can make the better off have tax cuts. And I wasn't able to converse with them, but Jeremy Hunt, I was on a Laura Kunzberg program with Jeremy Hunt, and I had to speak afterwards. We didn't have the kind of, but he said, with benefits as a carrot and stick approach, and that there will be tax, the more you earn, there'll be tax breaks. But my response to that is, why are you using a stick on people on benefits? You don't use a stick with people on business. You don't use a stick with people who've just inherited their, why, I'm in the film and television industry, and in various recent budgets, Gordon Brown did it, but Jeremy Hunt did as well, there have been tax breaks for investment in film and television in the UK. There've been lots of carrots, and it's been great. And the film industry's never been healthier in terms of the number of productions in the UK. And it's a very skilled industry here, and all being used. I mean, it's worked wonders, So that carrots can work, but why with a certain group of people? Why with people who are in business you do the carrots, but people who are on benefits need the stick? And actually, I think what we can learn from the carrot issue is that it can be extended, and then there's the whole other thing, which and it's an endless question, but it's to do with just the problem in the UK or in government at the moment is there is never any incentive to think long term. The two-child cap on benefits that exist at the moment would cost something like, I think it's something like 1.8 billion a year to get rid of it. But it would lift 1.1 million children out of poverty, 800,000 out of deep poverty, another 300,000 out of poverty. And you still think, yeah, but that's 1.8 billion. Where do we get the 1.8 billion? You know, the Rwanda scheme has already cost 500 million. If it carries on, if Rishi Sunak, the whole planes and whatever, it was estimated to go up to about 2.5 billion.
Yep.
His national service thing is something like 2 billion. You know, the money is there. It just needs the will to change the priorities. You know, if someone in charge at the Treasury would say, actually, shall we get rid of child poverty? It could happen. In the same way that during the pandemic, they said we need to get everyone who's sleeping rough off the streets, and it happened. There's that. But what people don't also factor in is what it saves to the economy, taking people out of poverty and putting them back into work and actually takes pressure off
public
schools,
services,
public services, you know, sadly the prison system, social, you know, everything. And that's a long-term benefit. But it's just harder to calculate what that is. But that's because it's incalculable. I mean, it's immense. And the other thing I keep banging on about is that, because the other thing the government looks at is benefit fraud. About benefit fraud. And real campaigns against benefit fraud. Business fraud is 10 times higher than benefit fraud. But we haven't had, you know, vans going around with posters saying, if you see a businessman who's really, you know, screwing the system, ring this number. Do you know what I mean? We don't have that.
No.
Why not?
But it goes in the city, they'd be inundated with phone calls.
It makes more sense. So there's that. But also there is this, you know, just inherent in our system is this, it's hard to do the long-term thing. That, you know, that if we lifted kids out of poverty now, we will get the benefits in 5 and 10 years. But this government might only be in for 4 years or 5 years. So I want the benefit, you know, I want to feel the benefits now. And it's the same with hospitals, the same with, you know, it's the prevention is costs money now, but the impact is it saves money because prevention is better than cure. But we don't have the money to put into the prevention. So we'll just have to deal with the cure, even though that's much more expensive.
It's always a political choice, isn't it? How and where we spend the money, and the sort of the analogies that will get deployed around you know, the country's credit card and the household budget. Sort of, they're often employed for conversations, for example, about benefits, but not in the context of something like national service. And I think it's sadly becoming a recurring theme that as we go through times of economic hardship, post-2008 and sort of more broadly in the noughties, you heard this sort of rhetoric around benefit scroungers and a lot of the TV, even sort of mass media TV programs, right, Benefit Street, things like that. And it's starting to come back around now. And the point you made there is such an important one that actually quite often we conceive of the criminal as, you know, sort of, I don't know, someone wearing a hoodie or a tracksuit, but actually there are sort of distinguished gentlemen, right, in our society who donate to noble causes and run fantastically successful businesses, but will sit, for example, let's say in America, in the boardroom meeting that decides we need to increase profitability. So actually, yes, we are going to increase the price at which we charge for insulin. But you look at that sort of person and say, that person, morally, what do you call that person? Are they a criminal? But we have this tendency to think, but bizarrely, that it's the disadvantaged, whether they're, you know, a person, you know, a brown person in a small dinghy crossing the channel.
I mean, you say we. I mean,
not me.
But I'd argue most people don't think that. Do you know what I mean? It's become a kind of trope within the political conversation. The likes of Sunak and Hunt and so on, they're kind of programmed to think that.
But they must be doing it for a political function.
Well, yes, but I think it's just part of their DNA in that they, you know, they grow up thinking carrot and stick approach. That, you know, that's what Thatcher said. She was on my bedroom wall. I want to be like Thatcher. I'll do the carrot and stick approach thing. And then the Labour thing of thinking, even though the last 14 years have showed us how actually incompetent they are at running things, even though they say they're the party of business and the natural party of government, that actually they're just not very good. Put the ideology to one side, they're just not very good. Somehow there's a Labour and left weird inferiority thing, which is, but we need to look a bit like them, otherwise people won't think we're proper. So we need to talk about cutting that and, costing everything and being absolutely fiscally, whatever, because, and so even though we see how bad the Conservatives have been over the last 40 years, we're still acknowledging that their argument is the one that we should still be taking part in. And what I'm saying is, no, don't acknowledge that argument, because they've been rubbish. The argument doesn't work. And I think this is what the electorate is now feeling, which is, like I said right at the start, I know you're talking about tax cuts, but for the moment, can we just stop that and just say how you're going to put money into the health service, education, transport, rail, how are we going to sort this? And of course, the shit in the rivers. How are we going to sort that? Can we just have a discussion about that now, please? And then we can go back and vote for whoever we want to vote for. But can we just park all this, the language of business and language of, I'm not having a go at business. I'm just saying we think people who are in business are so perfect that we're still slightly mesmerized by them. And, as with politicians, the thick of it, people in business are human. So there'll be ones who are really good, and there'll be ones who are terrible, and there'll be ones in between. And we shouldn't just see them as one group of people who, for some reason, have an expertise. I always laugh at, who was it, Lady Mone, Baroness Mone? Mone, what's that her name?
Mone, yeah. No. Michelle Mone, yeah.
Michelle Mone, and her husband talking about the PPE thing.
In the interview with
yeah. And her husband going, well, I'm an entrepreneur, so I don't quite see the ins and outs of how the legalese at the House of Lords works. I'm an entrepreneur. And I think, don't just saying you're an entrepreneur does not get you off.
No.
I could
Oh, clemency then, obviously, how silly of me.
Yeah, I could get old bottles of soft drink and take them back to the shops that, and ask for 10p in the bottle and call myself an entrepreneur. I can set up a little thing on TikTok, or an Instagram account and go, I'm an influencer and I'm an entrepreneur. No, you're not. You're just someone who's got 10 friends and a suit.
Micro-influencer.
Yeah, that's where it starts. Do you know what I mean? So don't say, and somehow saying you're an entrepreneur you get away with it. So you can go up, in the middle of a pandemic, you could say, I'm an entrepreneur, I'll get you safety, I'll get you masks and...
and what did you do previously? Oh, you made sweets. Oh, yeah, fine.
Yeah, I used to run a pub. But we're always cleaning up at the end of the night, in the pub. So, and you want stuff that's about being clean.
Yeah, that'll work.
I've got
Can
friends.
you make ventilators?
No, but I can look it up, certainly.
Great, that's all we need.
It's just that thing, it's like in The Apprentice, isn't it? When they say, your job for tomorrow is, I'm going to ask you to open up a whelk stall in the high street. Do you know about seafood and stuff? No, but I can give it a go. Anything for you, Lord. But we still, somehow, we're still curiously impressed by anyone who says they're an entrepreneur.
I wonder where that comes from. Maybe Thatcherism. I don't know.
Well, there's an element of that. There's an element of the kind of, the social media, the Zuckerbergs of this world.
Yeah,
who were entrepreneurs and who were disruptors.
Yes.
But for every one of them, there's 100,000 who didn't make it. And yet somehow that's the model. And as we've found to our cost, Zuckerberg can suddenly own the biggest company in the world with the most influence over thought in the world and as much information about our personal lives as anyone has ever had at their disposal, and still not know what he's doing, and we've allowed him to get away with it because, he's an entrepreneur.
That's the extraordinary thing, isn't it? The concentration of wealth power, information in those top companies. You know, bigger market cap bigger than the GDP of many, many countries combined.
I mean, he was a student at it was at Harvard, wasn't it?
I believe so.
He was trying to come up with how hot are various kind of female members. That's what he was, and yet somehow, within 20 years, he owns all the world's data.
Welcome to capitalism.
I know. And you say, how did we let that happen?
Yes, indeed.
And the history of Facebook has just been the history of Mark Zuckerberg going, I know we've not got it right here. We're on a journey, and you know, we're learning from this. You know, you shouldn't be learning on the job if you control all the world's information. You should have a pretty sure idea of what you're doing.
Finally, you've adapted Dr. Strangelove. Opening this autumn, starring Steve Coogan. Mm-hmm. Why Strangelove? Why now?
Well, I was asked. You know. That's the honest answer. The boring answer was, in that the producers of it were very keen to put Strangelove on stage, and they had previously put Network on stage with National. That was a great success. And the Kubrick family and the Kubrick estate had always been very nervous. They've never allowed a Kubrick project to be adapted for another medium. So this is the first time it's happened. And it was just through patiently explaining to them what they were going to do with it. They went to see Network, were impressed by it, so they knew it was in safe hands. And once they agreed, okay, let's give it a go. Sean Fawley, who's an amazing director, was approached, and he suggested me and the Kubrick family and estate thought that was a good fit. So I was asked. It was as simple as that. And it was so funny because they wanted to not, and this was about 2.5 to 3 years ago.
Oh, wow.
They wanted to keep it under wraps until the big announcement. Sean Fawley was trying to get hold of me to ask me, and I kept getting messages saying he's trying to get in touch, but I was in the middle of filming something, and I didn't know it was urgent. It was just, hi, got something to chat about. Yes, and this went on for about, chasing each other for about 6 months. And eventually I had 5 minutes. Oh yeah, I must ring Sean. Sean, do you want to do, it's about Dr. Strangelove, do you want to do Dr. Strangelove stage? I went, yes. Good, thank you. And then, but it just seemed obvious. And also, and we had all that discussion and the first draft really before, Ukraine and the war in Ukraine happened. But now it seemed so depressingly, we've come back to where we started. We're now genuinely still talking about World War III and nuclear weapons, and is the West ready for this, and all of that. So it's depressing, but also I think a lot of Dr. Strangelove is about weirdly Orwellian logic and conspiracy theory, and people who are assuming things about other people that they don't know and then responding to it in advance, even though they don't know. It's about lack of communication and lack of agreement, and what happens when two sides are polarized and then start getting annoyed with each other.
Do you know what? It was almost a sign of how sort of British politics brained I am. I was thinking, I'll ask Armando. I'll say, well, look, the leaders' debate, 7-way party debate, they're all talking, well, will you press the big red button? No, I'll press the big red button. I didn't even think that in the context of a war in Europe, where sort of the leader of Russia has at various points made not so subtle allusions to nuclear war.
Yeah.
For shame, that's what I was kind of thinking.
But I think that's part of how it's working at the moment, in the conversation we're seeing on our screens and on our radios and podcasts. It seems curiously detached from what's happening in the real world.
Yes.
The real world is complicated, and complicated things are difficult to get across.
They are, certainly.
In 45 seconds.
That disassociation between kind of reality and what you're hearing in the media is such a powerful dislocating thing.
The climate thing, again, scientists are going, it's actually sort of too late now, but, we can do our best to make it not quite as bad as we think it'll be. Whereas you have politicians saying, of course, net zero, but within, but we need to make net zero much more comfortable for most people. As if somehow you can dictate the weather, like Thor, when in fact, all you can do is stand there as a tidal wave comes and you can put the brolly up.
Please tell me there's more hope. Please. I need to.
Well, only in that, if we keep banging away and calling out not just the flaws in the language used by our political leaders, but also, where the media has just not done its job and is not focused on certain big topics that I think actually all of us are really worried about. Because as I say, if they don't do that, then this growing frustration just builds and builds and builds, and then you get something much more sinister happening. And that sinister thing is not going to be stopped by you calling anyone who thinks they might vote for them stupid or a racist or whatever, because the whole idea is to try and win them back, and you're not going to win them back if you go, you stupid racist, could you vote for me? That's not going to work. And similarly, you can't do the thing of we should all be very inclusive and we should, think very carefully about how we talk about people, or we will destroy you. It doesn't, you've got to have, there has to be an empathy and there has to be a willingness to hear what other people have to say before you start punching, because otherwise, we'll just retreat to our different silos, really, and which is how the film Dr. Strangelove ends, in that they talk about going underground and starting again in their own little tunnels underground. Well, we don't want to get there, so we have to engage.
Yes. Maybe we should all listen a little bit before we start talking.
Well, yeah, and it's so easy. It's so easy, especially when all you have to do is that, or is it that? No, I can't remember. That.
You won't have to do that. So you don't have to be straight out of the brain.
You're just it's so easy to do that.
Yeah.
So people do it.
Armando, thank you so much.
Oh, pleasure.
For taking the time to speak to us. I really appreciate it.
I think we've sorted everything. So
we have. We've sussed it. Yeah. Good job
This
done.
is the last podcast, isn't it?
Yeah. The final
this
podcast.
Is the one. Yeah. Good. Excellent.